Hi everyone, welcome to the Dave's World YouTube channel. So I had a lot of people contact me because they wanted the parts that I was making for Gen 1 and Gen 2 Cruzes, so I decided to start a website called supercruises.com. So what I really wanted to do is create a video to help people see how to install the Widow Turbo, or at least a Gen 1 Cruze Turbo. So I have a Widow Turbo which comes in 3 different stages. The stage 1 is good for like a stock car, stock injectors, and you want a little bit extra power, but you maybe not have a tune and you're replacing a blown turbo. That's what the stage 1 Widow is for. Then I have a stage 2 Widow, which increases your horsepower, which the stage 1 also does, but the stage 2 increases it more horsepower. And then I have a stage 3 Turbo, which is a completely custom turbo. It's about 60 millimeters. And so you have the ability to get all 3 turbos from me, and I wanted to have a video out there showing how to install a turbocharger, because the nice thing about the turbos that you get from Super Cruzes is the turbos are pretty much factory replacement specs. So when you put the turbo in your car, it's going to go in as if you're replacing the turbo, so there's no modifications have to be made. And the good thing is I have an intercooler system that also installs, and no modifications need to be made to the car as well. So this video is to help show everybody how to install a turbo. You can get an idea of what's involved, and then hopefully it'll help. Okay, there is pretty much oil everywhere. The other thing is I'm seeing a bunch of oil coming out of that oil cooler. So I decided to keep this in the video in real time because I wanted to explain that under the turbo and behind the turbo you have an oil cooler which is known to leak and be damaged over time. And I thought it was important to show that while you're doing a turbocharger, you should probably look at your oil cooler while you're in there. Basically, it's behind the turbocharger, and since it's behind the turbocharger and it's such a pain to get to, we might as well replace that while everything is off. Unfortunately, the nuts and everything are rotted on the exhaust. I would like to have the downpipe out of the way. I'm actually going to have to pull the entire exhaust system because that's so rotted that if I even try to break these loose, they're probably just going to strip out. So I'll probably just drop everything and hopefully get it out of the way enough that I can work up here and be able to get to all these lines because they're in such a pain in the butt spot. Now again, since this is a turbocharger video, I wanted to keep this part in the video because it's very common for your exhaust to get rotted and rusted together, and sometimes when you try to break things loose, the exhaust actually breaks. So I actually decided to pull this down and off to the side in one piece because it was much easier to do it that way than it was to try and separate everything separately. So we have our coolant lines. One is right here feeding the turbo, and there's another one down here where the line comes off the block. What I'm going to do is leave them attached to the back of the turbocharger. I'm going to unhook here and unbolt down there and try to catch everything into this bucket. Now what I usually do is I recycle the antifreeze, but because this antifreeze is garbage, I'm just going to catch it in this bucket and I'm going to dispose of it. I don't want to put it into the basin I usually use to catch my antifreeze for all my other cars because, for example, if for some reason I have to drain the cooling system on the Corvette, I don't want the antifreeze that's in my usual container to be mixed with oil and then I have debris in that antifreeze, so I'm just going to keep it separate. You may or may not be able to see this because it's such a pain in the butt. I'll try to get this on camera. I'll do the best I can, or at least I'll show you after. Next, what I'm doing is removing the coolant line that's on the right side of the turbo going up to the this is basically the T that goes to the overflow tank and down to the cooler. Alright, so we're catching everything in the bucket. The reason why I'm draining it just from the turbochargers, I do not want to drain the entire cooling system because then we're dealing with a couple of gallons worth of fluid. At least this way you might only be dealing with like 1 gallon of fluid, maybe even less. So that's draining. It is making a mess, so I usually put cardboard under every bucket, and you can see from right here it's draining right out of this supply going to the turbo, and then we have to get this is loose, but we need to get it removed. Once this is completely removed and I get this line and this line out of the way, we can get to the bottom bolts on the turbocharger, and then this guy will be out. Okay, so you saw in the beginning of this video that I was using a little propane torch. So what I did was the night before I let WD-40 soak in on these nuts, and then what I did was use the propane torch, and that helped loosen up the nuts, so when I pulled everything out, the nuts actually came loose.
The reason you want to do that is over the years you end up getting corrosion in the nuts, and then they end up basically welding themselves to the studs. So here I'm just very simply taking all the nuts off, and then once you get all the nuts off behind the turbo, you'll have one more coolant line that may or may not still be hooked up. I was able to break that loose with that long extension that you saw in the last scene. And then right here, what I'm doing is I was able to get to pretty much every nut except the one behind the neck, and I just use a simple angled wrench. I believe it's a 10 millimeter or a 3/8, which is the SAE standard for 10 millimeter about. But that's what I'm doing here. You have to pretty much do that one with a regular hand tool. And you don't want to strip any of these, because if you strip them, you're pretty much stuck. So you have to be very careful, which is why I showed using the heat and then also spraying everything the night before. You always want to use WD-40. Okay, so basically, I do not have sponsors on my Dave's World YouTube. I'm my own sponsor, if you want to really get technical. Years ago, people were asking me to basically reproduce all the parts that I was making when I started doing YouTube. So I created my Dave's Custom Parts website. Now, this is not my original site. I just wanted to show everybody that I have a brand new site. When I started YouTube, I started working on, ironically, Jettas and the Gen 2 Cruze. So I was messing around with Jettas. People in the Jetta world, liked my videos, but people in the Cruze world really liked the parts I was making. So I came out with a website with really only 3 parts on it, known as davescustomparts.com. Then I created a brand called Super Cruze. So in the future, this is going to be the main site. Now, you can come to this site anytime you want. Right now, the site is supercruzestore.com. If you come to supercruzestore.com, this is the website you're going to see. It's a really cool site. I've been working on it slowly. And eventually, when you go to davescustomparts.com, shopdavesworld.com, go to ultimateecotex.com, it's going to bring you to this new site, which I'll be expanding on. The reason I like this new site, it has much better navigation, and it's split up per car now. So when you come here, it's much easier to find parts that you're looking for. For example, if you look over here at the Malibu section, you open it up, you're going to see just the parts that specifically I make for Malibus. It's not mixed together anymore, which I really like. I know it says 1964 to current. It's because I used to have 60s versions of Malibus, which is known as the Chevelle. So eventually I'm going to have cool stuff in there for those cars. But my website really is stuff I like to make. I used to have a Miata. That's why you see Miata on here. There's no parts in there yet, but I do make a few things for the Miata. And I have some people who moved on from the Cruze. So if you had a Gen 1 Cruze or a Gen 2 and you needed, a bigger vehicle, you might end up getting a Malibu or an Equinox. Some of you have Sonics and you upgrade to the Cruze, or vice versa, go back to the Sonic. So you contact me and you want parts. So what I started doing is making parts that work on several vehicles, and this website's just much easier to navigate. And if you're a member of the YouTube channel, right down here, if you're not, you can join. And when you join here, it brings you to the Dave's World YouTube channel, and it'll bring you into the member section, and you can actually join. There's different levels. And when you join, you actually get... Let me just kill that real quick. When you join, you actually get discounts on those websites. So if you're a member, let me know. When you become a member, contact me via email. Let me know what your member name is, and then if there's anything you want to buy, I will give you better pricing. All right, so let's finish getting this turbo out of the car. Now, the next step basically is going to be when you have a new turbo going in, you want to look at your old turbo and take any kind of accessories off of your old turbo so they can go on to the new turbocharger. So you can see here I'm removing the diverter. Now this is a Forge Motorsports diverter through B&R. You can get this through Super Cruises as well. That little sensor you saw me pull off is known as a map sensor. Well, it's got a couple names. I call it a map sensor, but regardless, make sure it comes off of your turbo and goes onto the new turbocharger. Now, this footage is from another friend of mine's car. This is a B&R turbo that I am getting ready to install. I decided to show you guys, different aspects of installing turbos. So any turbo you're going to be putting in, you need to put these lines on back of the turbo, and they're on a swivel, so when you're putting them into the car, they're going to hang down, and you have to watch when you're bringing it into where it needs to go. Now on this car, I also changed the studs and nuts. They're brand new ones that I offer through my website as well. So as I'm sliding this in, you're going to really, in the back while you're sliding in, you have to make sure the lines lay where they need to be, so when you're sliding the turbo into place, the lines will line up with everything on the engine block so you don't have any issues. So for me, the one coolant line that goes on the left side of the turbo to the left side of the engine block swung downward, so I had to pull it up and then get the fitting in place, and I had to run a long extension from the front of the turbo snout straight back, and I mounted that first before I installed the turbocharger. It made it easier to put the line in. So the final important steps are going to be making sure that you have your oil line under the turbo mounted. Basically, every once in a while I forget to mount those and then I end up getting oil on the floor. So you want to make sure those are mounted underneath. You want to make sure your cooling line's mounted to the engine block, and then you have a little tiny oil line that goes off the oil cooler. There's a special little like valve in there. When you push it in and tighten it down, it uses one single bolt. It's very easy. It's in the front. You don't even need a picture of it. You'll see it when you do the turbo. And then after that, you want to torque down all the bolts on the turbo and then do a heat cycle.
I'm doing what's known as a heat cycle. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying I'm letting the car idle and get warm. I'm watching to make sure it doesn't overheat. I'm watching to make sure there's no leaks. And there's gonna be a little smoking. It's because it's a brand new turbo, so there's oils all over the housing. And there were some oils that got on everything while I was doing the swap. So right now I'm letting everything run. And at the end of the video, you guys will, hear it driving. All right, so what I'm doing this time is I'm gonna monitor the desired boost and the actual boost to make sure the turbo is putting out what it's supposed to. Oh yeah, we're actually over desired boost. So the turbo and the wastegate are doing their thing. So it was desired, it was looking for 21, it actually peaked at 22 and I let off. So that's just what I want to see. It's commanding and meeting exactly 22, so that's good.